All right, world history, here we go. I'm gonna, since I'm not here today, give you a little background on weapons and life in the trenches in World War I. So just a reminder, this show is on the website, as are all of our notes, and you can see them there and print out a copy if you need to. All right, so we're gonna take a look at talking about how World War I is really different than any other war. So yesterday we got a sense of how the war got pulled in very quickly because of one assassination. It pulled in really everybody and their overseas colonies. That's what we learned about last unit. So pretty much every country you see up here had some overseas colonies somewhere. It might be in Africa, it might be out in Asia. They expected those countries to kick in and help out, and so you're going to see that in some of the battles and in some of the soldiers. So when we're talking about the war, we're going to see there's really two different areas that we're fighting. We've got over here the Western Front, okay, and this is where the Allied powers, mostly the United Kingdom and France, we're going to be battling the Central powers, mostly the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany. So the fighting we're going to see is going to be mostly around here. And it was pretty much a stalemate or a deadlock from the beginning. They just couldn't move, and we'll talk about why in a second. The Eastern Front is going to be a lot more mobile. Okay, the Eastern Front is going to be between Central Powers again and the Ottoman Empire here, Bulgaria too, and mostly Russia. Okay, but because Russia is a little behind militarily, they have a lot of people, but we've been talking about how they just don't really have a lot of technology yet. They're going to lose quite a bit over here on the Eastern Front, and this Eastern Front is going to be a lot more mobile than this Western Front. So it's really just where you see the red meeting the green. That's the two major areas of fighting in World War I. Okay, so they learned pretty quickly in World War I that you really shouldn't stand up and fight in rows, right? And the reason they do that is because we now have the machine gun. We've got automatic weapons. It really doesn't make much sense to stand up anymore. So they had to fight in trenches, and they would dig these trenches into the dirt. And you can see they would, they would, sorry about that. Okay, they would stand right here, and they would try to kind of barricade as much as they could and shoot from the trench. Sometimes they would go over the top and run to the next trench, hopefully kill all those guys before they killed them, jump in and take over. And this is really how World War I was fought. Needless to say, we have a tremendous amount of casualties. Plus you've got all kinds of things like landmines, barbed wire, which you might say, how's barbed wire a weapon? Well, barbed wire is not going to kill you, but barbed wire, you're going to get stuck in it, and you're not going to be able to move. You're a target then. Or you might get caught in a mustard gas attack, even worse. So that would be really bad. So this is the way that World War I was mostly fought. And you can see here's an aerial view of the trenches. Some of them are pretty advanced. Others were literally just holes in the wall, but sometimes even the Germans were pretty known for having pretty advanced trench clubhouses and stuff for their high-ranking officers. Here's a British trench in the French Battle of the Somme. Let me see if I can move this down there a little bit. So you can see the Battle of the Somme is one of the major battles. And here's a guy sleeping right there, look at this guy trying to sleep. He's trying to sleep. He looks like, maybe like he's in a really boring class, hopefully not now. And that's the kind of thing they would have to do. All right, next up, here's some French soldiers right there firing over their own dead. I mean, this is the kind of thing these guys saw every day. So it's pretty horrific battle. I mean, battle is never fun, but this was pretty awful. Here's an aerial view of opposing trench in what became known as no man's land. So no man's land was an area between the two trenches that were fighting where really all bets were off. I mean, you were just trying to run to get over here. People would get mowed down. People would get caught in landmines or barbed wire. And it was pretty bad. Okay, trench rats. This one's kind of fun. So a lot of men that killed in the trenches were buried almost where they fell, and that would attract rats. Here are some quotes from soldiers fighting in the trenches. The rats were huge. They were so big they would eat a wounded man if he couldn't defend himself. Ew. Okay, this one's even worse. Ready? You ready to have a little nightmare here? Hope you didn't just eat something. I saw some rats running from under the dead men's greatcoats, enormous rats, fat with human flesh. My heart pounded as we edged towards one of the bodies. His helmet had rolled off. The man displayed a grimacing face, stripped of flesh, the skull bare, the eyes devoured, and from the yawning mouth leapt a rat. Yummy. So this is the kind of thing that these guys saw in the trenches all the time. Now, these trenches are mud. You're living in mud. It rained, it snowed. I mean, mean, you had no protection from the elements, so these guys are wading through the water. That would obviously really, really hurt your feet. Okay, I'm giving you a warning. You may not want to look here. I'm going to show you something called trench foot. Trench foot is basically when your feet are so gross from being sitting in standing water for so long that they literally start to rot off. You ready? You might want to look away. Here it comes. There it is. Those are feet right there. This guy's lost some toes. You see they turn black? Okay, I'll move on there. But you get the picture. It was really bad. Life in the trenches was pretty horrible. Here's a famous poem that we'll look at a little bit more when I get back, but it's called Dulce et decorum est, which translates from Latin to "It is sweet and fitting." Pro patria mori is the last line. How fitting and sweet it is to die for one's country. And we'll take a little look at that one when I get back. I'm going to go into that discussion. The other thing we're going to see play a role in World War I, aside from the horrific machine gun, is poison gas. This is before we had any rules of what you could and could not do. We've got rules now against things like poison gas and biological warfare. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it just means that if you get caught using it, your military, can be brought up on an international court, and you'll get in trouble for that. So you had to be careful about poison gas. It was called mustard gas because it gave off kind of a yellowish hue, which you can see here. Here's a painting that shows that. And you would literally, if you breathe this in, your lungs would start to disintegrate and you would literally drown on your own lungs. It was awful, horrible way to die. And these are things that men on the trenches lived with every day. So they did do some kind of primitive gas masks. They attempted to try to, kind of offset that. And they did the best that they could. But that's going to be another thing that really affects the outcome of the war. Look at the poison gas deaths here during the years of World War I, 1914, 1918. Quite a few non-fatal. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily kill you all the time, but it would do quite a bit of damage. And here's the deaths. Here's the total. So we've got 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million people either killed or severely hurt from poison gas during World War I. So that's going to make, after the war's over, it's going to make people really say, hey, we should change that. It's just a few pictures of some soldiers resting in the trenches. Here's some Australians. You might say, what are Australians doing in World War I? Well, remember, they were a British colony, so they were expected to fight in the name of the British Empire, just like a lot of other colonial people were. Here's a diagram of the trenches, and some of them were pretty advanced. This is what I would say is definitely a pretty advanced one. Here we've got some British soldiers. Their hats were just kind of round, similar to the American hats, actually, preparing to go over the top in the Battle of the Somme on the Western Front. And some of the German trenches were pretty awesome, actually. They've got barbershops, officer clubs. I mean, they didn't mess around there. But your average foot soldier did not see anything like that. This is kind of an interesting picture when we're talking about the colonial aspect of the war and how it was a world war. These are prisoners of war that are held in a German camp, but they're from all different colonies. We've got a guy from Senegal, here's Tunisia, Sudan, Russia, American, Portuguese, and English. We've got a little bit of everything there, and it just kind of shows that this was truly a world war that really did pull in countries from all around the world. African Americans played a big role in the war for the United States, and you're going to see this a little bit more in U.S. history, but I still wanted to at least mention it, that the Harlem Hellfighters were the 369th Regiment. They actually fought alongside the French, and they were very highly decorated by the French. They got the Croix de Guerre, which is similar to like the Silver Star or something, a big honor here in the United States. Interestingly enough, because of the segregation and racism, they were not recognized by our government until much, much, much later. Their ancestors, their children had to really fight for that, but the French were very happy to see them, and they played a huge role at turning the tide on the Western Front. Stormtroopers. This is something you might think of when you think of Star Wars, but it actually got its name here from the German fighters in World War I. And they had a very sleek uniform. You can kind of see the guy from the back, actually, he kind of looks like a stormtrooper with the helmet and stuff, right? So the Germans are really going to be able to test out their pretty advanced military. Remember, that was something they had really built up in the late 1800s when they first became kind of unified. And here's some stormtroopers moving out against this guy. A lot of the action came at night or in the wee hours of the morning, and during the day it was usually pretty quiet. You wanted to try to surprise people and go over the top at night. And so that's what you tended to see happen. So this is another kind of interesting story. Christmas 1914, and this is after the war's been going on for a couple months here. There's actually a movie based on this, but Germans started to kind of come out of their trenches and actually start decorating for Christmas and singing carols. And the British and French soldiers met them, and they actually had a truce on Christmas Day. They exchanged gifts, whatever they had, cigarettes, anything from home. But the very day after Christmas, they went back to fighting. Isn't that crazy? So they actually took a truce there, and it just kind of shows that these guys were human. And they were doing what they were told. They were following orders, but this was a war that I think a lot of people, even the people there, didn't quite understand why they were there, and really the alliance system. And it's going to drag on for 4 long years. It's actually been a song written by Garth Brooks for any country fans in the house. It's called Below Wood. That's all about the Christmas truce. And they were singing Silent Night, singing in English, singing in German. So it's just kind of interesting to see that happened. Why was the Western Front such a stalemate? Well, trench warfare made it really hard to actually go anywhere. And remember, in a war, you want to take over your enemy. You want to completely take them over. So here's one example of how ineffective trench warfare was. At the Battle of Verdun in France in 1916, 750,000 men lost their lives. That's on both sides, the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. And the Western Front had moved less than 10 miles. So 750, almost 1 million men, 750,000 men have to lose their lives to move 10 miles when the goal of your war is to take over your enemy. That means it's going to be a very long and very bloody war. So here's some of the British using the new machine guns right there, the technology. And the Eastern Front, like I said, is going to be way more mobile. The Russians are just going to have a tough time. In Tannenberg, which is today in Poland, 92,000 Russians were taken prisoner and 30,000 were killed, and the Germans only lost 13,000. Now, I say only because obviously 13,000 is a lot of people, but when you're looking at what the Germans lost, it's way less people. So the Russians are going to have a really tough time, and the Russian people are going to want to get out of this war. But the Tsar is not going to want to. He wants to seem tough, and that's something we're going to see really happen. So in short, I just wanted to give you a little background on the war here and how it's fought, so that you guys can now start looking at the actual battles and what happened here, and just think about how this is such a new and dangerous type of war.